I want to begin just by going back to the first day of the year, January 1st, 2020. No one could have imagined what was in store for the city of Tacoma, the state of Washington, the United States of America, and the world. So I'm just wondering, thinking back to that day, can you remember what you were most eager to work on over the course of the year? What sort of set of priorities, back before all of these interlocking crises really came to the fore, what were you most eager to work on in 2020?
Yeah, so I was just, when you said January 1, I was trying to think about where I was on January 1. And for the first time, I'd taken a little vacation and I was actually in Florida. I'd gone to church at midnight and, woke up the next morning and was just kind of reflecting on exactly that. What does this year look like? How can this year be a better year? What can I focus on? And I really wanted to focus on housing affordability because it's something I've been working on that's been a real issue in our community and in communities across the world and the country. The second thing is that I really wanted to, I started a youth commission when I first got elected and was really focused on getting them, they were just finishing their first year. And one of the things I really wanted to work with them on producing was a youth summit and getting youth more involved in the decisions that affect them in our community. So I was thinking about how to work with my commission on a youth summit. And then two additional, I have four things, so not just three, I got four. So the third thing was really looking at the success of people who live in our community. So we call ourselves the City of Destiny, but how are we removing barriers to make sure everyone who lives here can achieve their full potential, whether that is in employment, in health, but really I had to focus on working more closely with my Business Advisory Council to make sure that we were getting more jobs in Tacoma, that we were able to put people to work. Because when we think about lifting people out of poverty, one of the greatest ways to do that is to give them a good paying job. And then fourth, I've been chewing on the idea of launching a compassionate Tacoma or something around compassion and love and how we, not necessarily knowing that we have to do all this work, but how we do this work. And so I was thinking about probably those four things and working on those four things coming up in 2020.
Mm-hmm. There are a million and one questions I could ask you about how you dealt with the COVID crisis and sort of the managerial fortitude that required. But I'm really interested in hearing about how you think the crisis has impacted civic life in Tacoma. What impact has it had on the way that residents of Tacoma sort of view democratic life in the city or engage with democratic life in the city? With the erosion of sort of a physical, public sphere, how do you think that it's sort of impacted the sort of consciousness of residents of Tacoma and sort of the way they view their life sort of as a resident of Tacoma?
Oh, Michael, that's a really, really great question. I think there are a couple of things that I can unpack there. One is that, obviously when COVID first hit, right, nobody knew. We had our regular community engagement, process at our council meetings. We met with constituents, all of that. And in our regular meetings, we had public comment every week on things on the agenda. And then we had community forum once a month for things, for anything in which the city has jurisdiction over. And when COVID hit, because we could no longer meet in person, that all came to a grinding halt. And I think one of the things that COVID has meant to us as we talk about people's democratic life is how do we pivot? Because initially it was just, well, it's only going to last till the summer, so we just got to figure it out and we'll just stop it for now. Everybody can write or send emails. But obviously it didn't end in the summer. And then we had our second pandemic hit, that's what I call it. The second pandemic that is systemic racism. And then we had to be innovative. And as I said, pivot and find ways to engage citizens. And I would say through the course of the Black Lives Matter movement, I think people found ways to use their voices in ways they had not used them before. And I think the coming together of those two pandemics, meaning COVID and systemic racism, I think people were already feeling the pressure of COVID, right? And wanting to find a way to make their voice heard, but still dealing with their own internal issues, trying to take care of themselves and their families and trying to get their kids to school and thinking in the back of their mind they want to say something, but not having the time to really engage. And I think then the Black Lives Matter movement and systemic racism obviously took people to the streets, right? And so then people began to find ways to use their voice. Then we as a city figured out how to do how to bring public comment back and how to bring citizens forum back. And so, but I still think, even though, we have now this technology that we're using, so I'm getting to meet with constituents again, but it's still not with the same regularity. It's still not, I still get to go to the grocery store and I go to Costco every now and again. I do those things and you get to see people, but there are some barriers or some things that are different than before COVID, but I think people are finding their voice. People are still finding ways to have their voices heard.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the Black Lives Matter protests, and I want to pick up on that point and also sort of the conversations about racial justice more broadly that took place this summer and have continue to take place at this very moment. So in a speech that you delivered in response to the death of Manuel Ellis, I want to read a short snippet from that speech. You said, quote, "We need to hold space in the media and in this city and in this country for a discussion not just on racism, but how we're going to dismantle racism." So I want to really zero in on sort of the language that is used to discuss systemic racism and how the language used by journalists and others sort of may or may not obscure the material impact that sort of racism causes downstream. I just want to ask sort of what role you think the media plays, and again, either obscuring or potentially illuminating important points about what steps should be taken in the policy-making process to really get at some of the conditions that perpetuate systemic racism. Because you saw this summer, a lot of the conversation sort of surrounded what does defunding the police mean? In what ways is racism systemic and structural? So can you just sort of talk about the importance of, precision in language, or what role you think language plays in sort of the policymaking process surrounding these issues?
I think the media has a tough job. I don't envy your job, Michael. I think it's difficult at best. But I think there are a couple of roles that the media plays. Number one, to tell the truth, to absolutely tell the truth, but to be responsible with that truth. And then the other thing I think the media can do a really good job of, and does a really good job of, is lifting the voices of those who are not always heard. Kind of going back to the well of continue to talk to people like me who are always talking to media, but really lifting those voices and those stories that people don't hear. And I think the media plays a really big role in educating community by lifting those stories and those voices and telling them in a truthful, as much as you can, non-offensive way. How as someone in this business, it's not always what you say, but how you say it. And I think there's a responsibility in media to tell the truth, that to pen someone's words correctly, but not to sensationalize it. And so I think if the media continues to focus in that way, it becomes helpful, because I think there's a community that's looking for media to educate them. For people who don't have exposure or experience in some of these instances, or some of these some of these challenges, a person who hasn't experienced them, who needs to understand them, if they don't know somebody that they can go directly to and ask and get the information from, I think that media plays a really big role in educating and telling people stories and lifting those stories so that we create better dialogue and better understanding of the issues that truly face our community.
So shifting gears a bit, Boeing has been on the mind of Washingtonians around the state recently, for obvious reasons. So as a mayor, I'm really curious what your approach is, or how you sort of address problems or sort of the tension that arises when, as a mayor, you want to invest in community and in future generations, but you also want to make the city of Tacoma an attractive place for business and a prosperous place. So how do you sort of strike that balance? How do you make Tacoma both a place where growth can occur, where businesses feel welcome, but yet sort of the vulnerable are taken care of, and that sort of community is receiving the investment that they are due? If favorable tax considerations are extended, what preconditions should there be for those considerations?
Community benefit, absolute community benefit from that, whether that is in jobs, whether that is in the economic stimulation that a new business brings to a downtown core, but there's got to be some benefit to the community. Now, I'm a person who doesn't believe in pitting one group against another. There's like either you're for business or you're for the environment. I think things can mutually exist and can actually complement one another in that existence. And so I believe that having a robust business climate in a city is really important to the entire community. When we talk about lifting people out of poverty, we're not lifting people out of poverty working a lot of minimum wage jobs, although that's a start. But we're lifting people out of poverty by giving them skills and allowing them to increase those skills and get better jobs and get promotions. And in order to do that, you've got to have businesses in the city who provide those opportunities. So I think, when we talk about lifting people out of poverty, one of the really great ways to do that is to get them training and get them a really good job. And so I think that's got to be part of how we look at sustaining business in our community. But I would say, if put in that position to have to make those kind of decisions, I would be absolutely looking at what is the benefit to the community, not just to the business, but to the community itself.
Mm-hmm. So looking ahead to next year, we have a legislative session coming up in Olympia in January, potentially a special session prior, but that is unclear. But in any case, when the legislature reconvenes, if you were on a call with legislative leaders right now, sort of as a mayor, what would you be telling them about what to prioritize and sort of at the local level, what cities really need, what support they need from Olympia in the year ahead?
There are a couple of things what's really bad is that because I am aware of the deficit that our state is facing because of COVID. It's really hard for me to make a lot of demands that I know they can't fulfill. So I know because that's what people do to me as a mayor, right? They're like, well, just do this. And it's like, I know how possible that is given our current crisis. So I'm not one to throw things out there that I know are absolutely impossible. So it's not that I don't have, a long list of demands. It's just the reality. I want to be realistic about what I'm asking for. So I just want to put that in context as I answer your question. But I think one of the things that state legislature is going to have to face as they get back to work or get into session, because I think they've always been working, but as they get into session, is to not do any harm. They're going to have to make some really tough decisions given the budget crisis the state is facing. And we have a lot of hurting people in our state, whether that is because they've lost their job or they can't pay their mortgage or their rent, or they're trying to work a job and they can't get their kids into school or into daycare. They're trying to balance those things. So they've got a lot of work to do, but I would say, for me, a legislative session looks like, please don't cut any funding from us that we already receive, right? I know that there's not going to be a lot of dollars for infrastructure. I know there's probably not, unless we get some more relief from the feds, a whole lot more money for small business and for education. But if, as you look at trying to balance the budget and you're thinking about the cuts you're going to make, think about the least vulnerable. Or no, I'm sorry, think about those who are the most vulnerable, and how we're going to care for those. There's a saying that says, rising tides or float. I've now, it just went out of my head. I can't think of the exact words, but it's kind of like, when we all do better, we all do better, right? And I always use the idea of when they started to build curb cutouts, right? They were building curb cutouts so that they were ADA accessible. But when they did them, all kinds of people benefited from them, right? Seniors benefited from them, people who rode bikes or skateboards, mothers in strollers, right? So everyone benefited. And so I say that to say, as they look at what they're doing, remember to think about those who are most vulnerable, because if we make decisions based on those who are most vulnerable, we will be making good decisions for our entire state. And so I would probably be general in my request. I mean, obviously, I want to make sure that we're getting COVID under control, that we're having the right amount of testing and the right amount of contact tracing, that we're putting money there, but that we're also giving cities the tools they need to recover from this COVID-19 pandemic. But I would also say, Michael, I will also say, as I said earlier, and I want to get back to that for a moment at some point, but as we look at systemic racism, I also think that there's some work that they can do that won't cost money, that they don't, that won't be on the backs of balancing the budget around systemic racism and how we look at transformation in our state. And I will also say, Michael, that when I talk about transformation, I know there's been a lot of cries, as you mentioned earlier, in the Black Lives Matter movement and systemic racism that relates to public safety and police. And I want to be very clear, that is just but one system that needs to be transformed. My argument from the very beginning has been, I want to transform policing, but transforming policing is not enough. We need to look at every system that puts up barriers for people to reach their full potential. And that is another thing I would be saying if I was sitting with my state legislators, and I have said this to some of them, I want us to look at all systems. I don't want to make a perfect criminal justice system, because that just means we put more people in it. I want us to fix all of the systems, all of the structures that keep people from being able to reach their full potential.
Dealing with the interlocking crises of the past year, has that changed your perspective on being a mayor at all? Do you think that had these crises not have happened, you would be proceeding in a way that you aren't right now? Not just on sort of a policymaking front for obvious reasons, but the way in which you sort of approach the very job and sort of the day-to-day perspective that it takes to govern.
So I think I said the first thing I've learned is that we are resilient. Like we as Tacomans, because I'm gonna personalize it to my city. We can do anything when we put our minds to it and we work together. So that's changed my perspective just a little bit. And again, as I said, the technology piece, the innovation that has come from still having to do business in a way, in a time when you can't do business as usual. And then as mayor, I mean, you said it in the beginning of this interview, Michael, January 1, if you'd asked me what my year looked like, I would have never said we're going to be in the middle of a pandemic and then another pandemic is going to hit and I would have never, someone even told me that. I watched a movie about this in January. I would have said, yeah, that's going to happen 100 years from now. That won't be my issue. I wouldn't have believed it. Even now when I watch old movies that have kind of this, look to them, this look and feel of the time we're experiencing. I go, wow, when I watched that movie, like Contagion or others, I would have never thought that I'd be leading in a time like this. So it has taught me that anything can happen. Absolutely anything can happen. But But and that is the part that can be scary. But I guess I am a glass half full person, so I always try to take the lesson in what is happening. I try to take that lesson so that I can learn from it and be better. Um, and what I've learned is that people will step up. If you can still find ways to engage, think outside of the box, be innovative, which is the word of the day. Um, but that you can still survive. Nothing ends the world. We can still get through it. Um, but it's also told me to take things very seriously. That you can't just go, oh, that's never going to happen. Like, you really need to um, think through crises that can come like this, and be prepared to step up and again take care of those who need it the most, because that will support everyone. And it also, I guess the final thing I'll say is that it's taught me that everyone and anyone can be vulnerable. I know that during this time we have seen people who have never thought they would need assistance. We've seen people who have never worried about very much in life worry about a whole lot of things in life. We've seen people's lives turned upside down. But I get back to that number one thing: we've seen people be resilient. We've seen parents who've never homeschooled before and working from home and homeschooling. I can't tell you how many Zoom calls I've been on where there's a kid running around in the background, or like we've risen to the occasion, because we are a resilient people. And so I continue to have hope, that we will get through this. And it continues to make me extremely proud of the city I live in, the city that I get to be one of the leaders of, and the people who live in my city.
Great. Well, Mayor, we appreciate your optimism. I think it's certainly needed at this moment. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity to chat.
Great. Thank you.